success is basically the capacity to survive failure. And when you survive failure, you understand all of those things. That's the way you build resilience, but then you become a better person, and that's what leads to success. And the moment you build out that contact base and you start connecting with people with power, I mean, these people are moving up the ranks, or at least they're highly influential in a big organization for a reason. And it's actually quite enlightening to listen to their life story. Someone's a CIO or a CISO or a CEO of a big bank or something. I guess a lot of salespeople use that analogy about spinning plates, and it is very true, because the more plates you spin, the higher the risk of you actually, I guess, dropping the ball. But if you're spinning all of those plates and the deals are dropping, then it doesn't really matter what the quarter is. And you talk about run rates and also talking about big deals. The consistency is the thing that's actually really good. And I guess from a sales management perspective, it helps with linearity. So that way your sales manager is not actually tapping you on the shoulder, hey, what's going on with this quarter or this month?
Welcome to GrowthPulse, the B2B sales podcast. You might be a salesperson. You could lead a sales team. Maybe you run a business or you're a battle-tested entrepreneur. Then we built this podcast for you. Great salespeople are built, not born. We learn so much from the deals we win, but we learn even more from the deals we lose. In each episode, we bring you some of the world's leading salespeople, sales leaders, and experts in sales tech to share their best lessons from both their wins and their losses. Before we start, please check out the screen of your phone or laptop, and if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you've clicked subscribe and press that like button down below. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, click the plus sign to follow so we can let you know when we publish each new episode. If you like the episode, drop us a comment with any questions about the show. We'd love to get to know our audience. Great businesses always feature world-class salespeople, and the best salespeople are always learning. So let's jump in. Welcome back to another episode of GrowthPulse, the B2B sales podcast. I'm Dan Bartels, one of your co-hosts, and I'm here with Simon Peterson. Mate, how about our new intro?
Oh, it's awesome. It's a fantastic new intro. Delighted to be innovating on the start of it again. Good cartoons, good message. Can't wait.
Yeah, it's cool. I think it's we're refining our messaging. We're refining how we're going to market, which is cool. So similar to what we do in our roles all the time. So I think that's a nice little evolution of what we're doing, mate. We've got a great guest coming on today. He's a good friend of both you and I. We've known him for quite a while. Guy Collison, mate, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mate, I want to make sure everyone gets a good sort of idea of your background. And, mate, you have done an absolute heap of stuff in your career. If I sort of, run through the plethora of companies you've worked for in like you're a bit of a journeyman in sales, really. You've worked in finance for Macquarie Bank. You've been at Salesforce, Oracle, DocuSign, Visio, now at Veeam with Simon, which is great to see. Mate, like that's an absolute, resume of gold-plated resume of companies in technology in particular. But you've also worked with some amazing customers as well, mate. Like I know, a number of the financial services companies, but like, mate, do you want to give us a couple of top line sort of brands you've worked with over time?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you for that. Yeah, I love that word journeyman too, by the way. It's a much better way of saying that I'm tenure, I'm old. So
You still got hair, mate.
it's yeah.
Yeah, both of us.
Won't be long. But yeah, so I love all of the customers I work with. I mean, they can be challenging and they can be rewarding at the same time. But I think it's about being able to work with these organizations and seeing them go through that journey. And yeah, so I have to say, I guess from top line view, I've worked with the big four banks. And including Macquarie Bank. So I've been a customer of Macquarie as well as an employee of Macquarie Bank. So that's a very interesting journey right there, especially when you see something from the inside and then you're trying to be on the outside looking in.
Yeah.
And I guess I've also worked with the industry super funds. So we're, I guess, working through a lot of the technology, not just as each single super fund, but across the board as a industry standard, especially when organizations or an industry alone is trying to go, say, cloud journey. So when they were in their infancy, right through to where they are right now. I've also worked with a lot of other logos outside of financial services. So while I was at Oracle, I worked with a number of retail and consumer good companies, supply chain companies. So everything from David Jones, Myers, right through to Coles and the West Farmers Group.
Yeah, wow. Mate, that's a wide and varied, list of customers, right? And all with different challenges. I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting when you look at an industry sector, people will look for, hey, you're in financial services or you're in retail, so therefore you know how all those organizations work. But my experience has been one bank doesn't operate the same as the next bank. They might be trying to address a similar market space or a market problem, but internally they are so different. I mean, is that the type of thing you experience as well?
Definitely. I have to say you can't really cookie cutter anything, even for use cases. But well, we'll put it this way: when I was working in an industry that's kind of a challenger industry, like say cloud, and then I started selling back into the banks, the point of view that I had wasn't about this is how we can replicate or this is what other banks are doing. My first talk track was always, well, you know what, you guys are looking to get into cloud, but this is what retail industry is doing, or this is what this company in this other sector is doing.
Yeah.
Some of these use cases are the things that could resonate here, but how about we talk about how we build out those use cases specific to what you are trying to build? And I'm not going to go into too much detail with each of the banks, but let's just say we're talking about financial markets trading. One person's asset class or one person's trading style is completely different to the person sitting next to him, let alone to what the other banks are doing. So it's very, very complex.
Yeah, absolutely. So Guy, you've you spent a long time selling software into financial services, retail, consumer goods, etc. How do you, you've obviously grown over that period of time. I guess when you left the banking industry itself and decided to jump into software, what motivated you to take the leap from, I guess, inside the banking sector to selling to the banking sector? What was the driver for you to get into software sales?
I'd like to say a lot of it was logical or at least tactical, but a lot of it actually had to do with luck. I got into banking because I was in very low level tech. In fact, I was so low level, it was to the point where I was working with a lot of the guys who were box moving back in the days. So that's a very old term that us oldies would remember when I used to sell desktops into computers and what have you. So I couldn't even get into those companies because I didn't have the experience. And so I used to sell the services of decommissioning that hardware. And through 6 degrees of separation, building a contact base, building a reputation, that's when you have your ecosystem of people you trust. And from there, that's when they look at you and say, okay, maybe you've got the opportunity now or the background to move into something into that space. And funny enough, me moving from tech into financial services, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but it was born out of a drinking game, and I met a few big swinging traders back in the day who I kind of called out in a pub and ended up winning a drinking game, and they put their money where their mouth is, and that's how I got my first job in the bank,
Wow.
or at least my first foot in the door. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, so to cut a long story short, they gave me that opportunity in order to kind of prove myself because I said to them, look, I think I can do this. Had an entry level job, moved into the trading, into foreign exchange of all things. And through there, because working for the bank and capital markets, you're kind of looking at the enterprise sector and every day is a different use case. So I could be dealing with BHP Billiton where their exposure is like they're exporting anything and everything with their foreign exchange exposure coming in, or I could be looking at XYZ importer who's importing widgets from China. And so we're looking at their exposure of US dollars, Chinese yuan, and so forth. And so I had to pick up really quickly what are those use cases, what are the ways that people operate. And my network base increased exponentially that way. And it was through 6 degrees of separation where a lot of the people that I worked with on the trading floor were working with the tech guys, the Reuters, the Bloombergs. That's how I moved into kind of the tech side of things, and that's how I started off at Reuters because a lot of the people that I worked with in the banks were in that sector. Now, this is where it gets really interesting because a lot of people that I work with in tech now were also in that space. Simon, you and I know a few of those people who were very much the pioneers in the Salesforce ecosystem. And it was just off chance that I met these people through, again, 6 degrees of separation or at work events or even at Dreamforce. And yeah, next thing you know, pretty much there's opportunities that came up in Salesforce, and that's how Simon, you and I first met. And
Yep.
I guess the rest is history. That's kind of the trajectory. So I guess to cut a long story short, it's all about that network-based building and up building a reputation with your sales history, and that is basically what I used in order to get to my next career move.
Yeah, mate. I think that of all the things that when we worked together, we I would call you out for having a real skill in is building those networks. And I know when we were both AEs together at Salesforce, one of the things that I could see in the deals and the engagements you had, and I think there was one of the deals where I remember you being basically just based at the customer. I can't remember which one it was, but for an extended period of time, it was like, we haven't seen Guy in like 9 months, but apparently he's working over at whichever bank you were trying to do some work with. Oh, okay. And a deal popped out, which is great. You know, for so many salespeople, but business people as well, understanding how to build those really tight networks, or especially when you don't have them, you're given a new territory, and hey, here's a new account. Like, how do I build it? How do I build those relationships? I mean, how do you approach it? I mean, I know you've got a music background as well as your sales background, but like, do you lean on different skills and different part of your life and your personality? How do you go about it?
That's a really good question. No one's ever asked me that. I think you have to have a really inquisitive mind. I mean, sales, we know what we need to do and we know how we kind of approach it, but there is a little bit of a dark art or a soft skill that we really need to kind of adopt here. And to your point, um, I guess that company that you mentioned before, I was pretty much 9 months in there. I mean, I literally had a desk that they set aside for me. So I was pretty much 1 day, 2 days a week with the customer. And that didn't come out of pure coincidence. It was about developing that trust. But in order to develop trust or develop that network base really quickly, I didn't realize what I was doing until I started at Salesforce and I saw that Simon Sinek Golden Circle video. That blew my mind because I'm not sure whether we need to kind of go into detail about the Golden Circle. But when I saw that 2-minute clip about the way he described Apple and how Apple kind of wants the world to see themselves, that's how I used my methodology and how I have conversations with people, because I love listening to people's stories, listening to their MOs, what they do in life and why they do what they do. And I didn't even realize that's also a really good way to get into someone's pain points and understanding their personal drivers.
Yeah.
But for me, that's just a natural conversation. And as soon as you have that connection with someone, and it's not about, hey, I want to solve your problem. It's like, hey, I really want to know about you. I want to listen to your story. What are those things that drive you? And let's see if something resonates. And I think that's probably the best way to build rapport quickly. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be doing business with that person, but chances are you'll leave a better impression with someone knowing what their drivers are or the things that actually get them up in the morning.
Yeah, I think it's one of those pieces that salespeople get, or anyone in business gets concerned about. When am I being too personal, or when am I prying into someone's personal life? And so then we default back to, oh, quickly, let me tell you all about the services that I'm offering and what my product is, and this is what the reason why we're here. And what they miss is that there's always it doesn't matter how senior that person's job title is on the other side of the table or on the other side of the phone or whatever. They're just a human. They've got dogs at home and kids that are annoying them, and a partner that today likes them, tomorrow doesn't, and they're going through all the same things that you are. And I think it's the actually getting that human connection with people and saying, hey, look, just tell me about your life. And people, I mean, my experience as a salesperson is people love to talk about their life. They love to talk about their job and what's good and what their wins have been. Hey, this has been a real challenge. And sometimes you can't help in any of those things. And then in that story, you'll find that kernel, that that seed that will turn into something you can actually do business with. But if you're not willing to actually learn and open that story, that it becomes a really inorganic engagement with this customer, and they're the ones that ghost you. They're the ones that disappear, right? I mean, Simon, I've seen you so many times had these like really personable relationships with customers. I mean, how do you approach it?
It's an interesting one, and to Guy's point, it's kind of one of those innate things. I mean, I think two themes there. I'm not a particularly extroverted person. I think, Guy, you probably wouldn't class yourself as being overly extroverted, but I think a genuine curiosity to get to know someone, and I'm not thinking in those conversations what I'm trying to sell to that customer or that executive. I'm genuinely curious about having a conversation, striking up a relationship, and have a good laugh with them, and just really get to know who they are as a person. And I think, Dan, as you mentioned, um, they're human beings. They've got all the same things going on, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And that's it's like when you turn up at a party and you don't know too many people. You look at a couple of people and you say, look, I'd really like to get to know that person. I think in a business context, it's subtly different, but just a genuine curiosity to have a conversation with somebody and see where the conversation goes. A little bit like this podcast, right? We don't sit down and script where the conversation's going to go, but we bounce off answers of each other, and we understand that to get someone engaged in a sales cycle, you don't lead with, here's my widget, you need it because of these pain points. You start that conversation just wanting to know who they are and what makes them tick, and personally, where are they going, where are they at? And I think if you connect with someone genuinely, you build that trust, and then over time, you get the right to understand how you can help their company improve what they do.
I think to add to that, the other thing about having an inquisitive nature, I mean, the moment you build out that contact base and you start connecting with people with power, I mean, these people are moving up the ranks, or at least they're highly influential in a big organization for a reason. And it's actually quite enlightening to listen to their life story. If someone's a CIO or a CISO or a CEO of a big bank or something, I mean, that you only get half an hour of their time if you're lucky. And the moment that you get an understanding of what they do, their career trajectory, I mean, it's amazing, that story. And if you get down to their personal life story, how they, I guess, evolved in their career, I mean, that's mind blowing for me. I mean, there's nothing quite like seeing or listening to someone's story, especially when someone is of a high caliber like that.
Yeah, and they want to tell it. And that's the other thing. I think people don't realize that people want to tell the story, and they want to help you out. Like they're, the executives you're trying to sell to, if it's individuals, they want to buy from you. They know that they're going to get their job done by engaging with other parties, other organizations, other executives. It's not by themselves. So, okay, here's my set of plans. Can you help me? Okay, you can't, not a problem. But I'm going to keep you in my back pocket for at some point where I might need you. And it may not even be in this role. I mean, the number of engagements I've had where, it's actually one or two roles on from the person that I dealt, when I first dealt with them, where you get a phone call and it's all of a sudden, hey, listen, are you still doing that thing? Or, oh, no, I'm in a different role now. Oh, well, actually, hold on, tell me a little bit more about that. Because we built that level of trust early on. The fact that they can actually open up and have those proper conversations. I think that's been so important in my career. I want to move on. We talked about a couple of topics we're going to talk about today, and for those, we're all in Australia, and Sydney and Melbourne have just gone through. Well, Australia has just gone through grand final series here for our football, right? So it's now finally combined into one weekend versus two, which is interesting. And in North America, you've just kicked into the NFL season. And I was reminded as I was watching the grand finals over the weekend that sales is not a season. Like it's a never ending season, right? And there's a real art to running whatever your quota period is, whether it's a month, a quarter, a half, a year. And hey, at the end of that season, you won, you lost, you succeeded, you've hit your number, you've got your bonus, or you're going to President's Club, or whatever you're doing. And then on Monday, there's no Mad Monday in sales. You're back to zero. And I think it's a really hard thing to deal with, right? We said you're a bit of a journeyman, mate. You've been through this cycle. I don't know. It'd be interesting to count how many end of months you've probably done, mate. But how do you approach that? Because I think there's a real psychology part of like the resilience that you've got to build as a salesperson. How do you approach that sort of that never-ending season?
Oh, mate, that's it is the multi-million dollar question, isn't it? I mean, there's a few different ways that I've approached it, and every year is different, and every year I have to do a bit of soul searching. But if I can talk about it, maybe on two ends of the spectrum, one where it really does pander to the ego, I think the best thing that anyone can do is actually close and hit your number in the first quarter because you're an absolute rock star for the rest of the year.
Yep.
So that's happened a couple of times, and there's nothing quite like that feeling because um, the moment you hit your number, you're just like 2 inches taller, and you just feel like $1 million, and you have this like this strut in your walk, and there's just something about that feeling being able to have your number for the year. But to your point, if you smash your number and it's towards the end of the financial year, and then it just resets back to zero. I mean, that's also kind of debilitating, and it really does have an impact to your own mental health because it's like, hang on, I've just hit my number, and it's 2 days of celebrating, and the next day it's like, great, we're back to zero again, and where's the next dollar coming in? But I guess the best way to deal with that is it's all about that continuous flow. And I guess a lot of salespeople use that analogy about spinning plates, and it is very true because the more plates you spin, the higher the risk of you actually, I guess, dropping the ball. But if you're spinning all of those plates and the deals are dropping, then it doesn't really matter what the quarter is. And you talk about run rates and also talking about big deals. The consistency is the thing that's actually really good. And I guess from a sales management perspective, it helps with linearity. So that way, your sales manager is not actually tapping you on the shoulder and say, hey, what's going on with this quarter or this month? But I guess the best way to look at it is linearity is really important for yourself as well. And most salespeople fundamentally miss out on that skill. The only reason why I picked up on it is because I moved into leadership and actually understood why linearity was so important on the way that we do forecasting. So I kind of put that soft skill back into the way that I manage my time. And I guess if we want to kind of circle back to your point about it's being end of football season here and the NFL season, a lot of these things actually have an impact to the way that you plan your day to day and also the way that you close your business, and even when you're running a sales cycle. I mean, if I can hark back to the days of Salesforce, where I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the end of financial year was 30th, end of January, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, end of Jan. So, end of AFL season is probably one of the hardest things for salespeople here in Melbourne because you basically have one quarter to finish the end of the year, and you're not really having a full quarter. So coming out of AFL season, you've got spring racing carnival here. So this is around November. So a week, it's a complete write-off because Tuesday's a public holiday. People take the day off on Monday, and most people are hungover on the Wednesday. So that week's a write-off. You can't get meetings. And then December, you're leading up to Christmas. There's a lot of public holidays. And being end of quarter in January, half the people in Melbourne basically take half of January off. And then you've got Australia Day, you've got which is the national holiday. It becomes quite difficult for you to plan those days. And I think the best way to look at it is you look at the business days and you kind of have to anticipate what your customers are going to be doing because they will be taking time off. They will be taking those days off here and there because everyone has to have fun. They have to recharge. So the way I plan those quarters is it's not 20 business days, 20 business days, 20 business days. It's like, you know what, there's 10 business days there, 10, 10, and this is what I got to do. I got to break it down to what I need to do on a day-to-day basis based on that. Every other day that I know is a write-off, that's my admin day. And that's probably the best way to approach it. And also from a sales stage perspective, this has been a rule of mine ever since I started at Salesforce. Spring Racing Carnival. So the day that it's Melbourne Cup, so the Monday before Melbourne Cup, if none of my sales stages are at a certain level, I am not going to forecast any of that for this financial year. So it has to get to a certain level that I could actually gain momentum. And if it's not at that point where, say, I'm at a mutual close plan, or I'm at that point where I know that I could get the right stakeholders in procurement in order to get this thing signed off by January, it seems like a long runway, but it's not. So that's my litmus test. So as soon as I know it's at that level, then I go, okay, this is forecastable. If it's not, then it's next year. And and detachment as well is probably the hardest thing to do there.
Yeah, so it sounds to me, Guy, like you need to go around the sun a few times to learn those lessons. in terms of, you know, those dates are coming up. You've done it so many times. You've got one eye planning in the future, and you're trying to get all your deals to a point where they're closable, knowing that, you know, your customers are going to take time off. But you also mentioned the importance of, you know, looking through to next year, right? So, you know, sales, there's no off season. I think the AFL and the NRL boys and girls are probably got a couple of weeks of downtime, and they'll probably come back in early January and start training and get ready for the next season. But I guess in sales, the funny thing that happens after the last day of a fiscal year is the first day of the next fiscal year, and there's really no off season. So it's an interesting one. So how do you sort of, as we're sitting in October right now. A lot of businesses have an end of December fiscal year. Some have end of January fiscal year close, especially those of us working for multinationals. You're in a role right now where you're selling. You've got a path to the end of December. Tell us a little bit about what you think about January, February, March at this point of the year.
I'm already thinking about that from about June the previous year, and maybe even so at the start of the year, because I guess it's not so much with mid-market companies, but the moment you get to the high end of mid-market, so any organization that's got more than, say, 500 seats and above, they're already planning their technology roadmap for 5 years. And I think the best way to answer this question is going back to what we were talking about when we're, say, in front of a CIO or even someone who understands what the technology roadmap for the company is. They're not looking 3 months in advance, they're looking 5 years ahead. And the best way to look at your sales cycle is to kind of be in line with what they're trying to do over the next 3 to 5 years. So with that in mind, to answer your question, Simon, I think it's the way I look at my sales cycle, and I know what my roadmap is. I know that I'm not just going to be selling them one thing. I want to sell them a couple of things based on what they're looking to build over the next 3 to 5 years. And what I think will drop this financial year is only just the start of it, because that's only building out to what January, February, March, all the way through to whatever's happening next year. So I guess to highlight that, the thing that I mentioned earlier about, I guess, closing, hitting your number in the first quarter, that's exactly what's happened for a few of my deals, where I started off with a couple of small little run rate deals. Coming towards spring racing carnival, I knew, hang on, there's got to be something big here. My sales management manager and my entire pod and team knew that something was coming, but there was always the pressure to try and bring that forward. And I thought, no, this isn't going to happen. But I knew that they were going to sign around April, because they were trying to get things signed off for their end of financial year, which is June. So that was the timeline. And because we agreed on the mutual close plan, or the mutual success plan, on how we sign this off with procurement, board sign off, the timelines were pretty much agreed, and we held each other accountable for that. So not just on my side and my management, but also with the leadership team, with the customer that I was selling to. And that's really important, because the moment we hit gates in each of those joint execution plans or mutual close plans, we knew exactly what needed to happen on both sides in order to ensure that this was going to get signed off by that day. And so when that first deal was signed in this financial year, and then we were trying to close for April, everything pretty much worked like clockwork. But the moment things were starting to go pear-shaped, let's just say legal took a little bit too long, we knew exactly where we needed to be in order to help hold people accountable to bring it back in line to the timelines. And so that's where the larger deal, which hit my number in first quarter, I already knew I was going to hit that deal pretty much from the time I came back from Christmas holidays. So it's, it may sound a little bit cocky to say that, but it's more of a case of trust and knowing the people around you are going to execute the way they do, because we've built enough trust with the people around us to build, I guess, the timelines and the roadmap, and we hold each other accountable. So I think that's really important, the way that you actually address sales, because when we're talking about multi-million-dollar deals, trust is really important.
It sure is.
Now, the thing that jumps out to me, Guy, about what you're talking about is systems. And I think as salespeople, we don't give ourselves enough credit or enough importance for the systems and the concepts we build within the way that we do business. I mean, you mentioned linearity before. You talked about mutual close plans. And these are some of the things that I know as I came through my career. I'd have sales leaders talk to me about it, and they go, "Oh, really? Do I need to worry about those things? Come on, that's just customer doesn't want to hear that." But as you kind of go through your career and you experience being a leader and you understand what's important for a business. I mean, so for those who don't know, linearity is around if you're doing bigger deals, can get very lumpy. So I'm waiting for weeks and months for this big deal to drop, and there's huge risk. So how do you start to look at your revenue stream being more linear and a flat line, and you've got constant trickle of deals closing? That's a really important feature of business. But then that mutual close plan function. I mean, I remember the first time someone took me through that, and I was like, "How's a customer doesn't want to see this from me?" And the more I've used a plan with a customer, you put whatever prefix you want in front of it to make it land nicely. The better the deals are, and the clearer they are. I mean, Simon and I have got a great story of someone who used one very, very poorly out of the very first meeting, put a mutual close plan in front of a customer, and the customer rang Simon and went, "I'm not quite sure this guy's right for me."
I'll never forget that.
But it was all about the prefix.
Yep.
Because if the prefix had been, "Hey, this is our demo plan," "Hey, this is," which is just leading into the new mutual close plan, the customer would have been fine. But the customer went, I think we're all jumping a few steps here, champ. We're not on the same page. There's no trust here. Yep. I think those systems are so crucially important for kind of how we build them. And I want to, I've seen you use a mutual close plan before, right? And it's become a feature of how I operate. And I've got some other systems that I've added to what I do. How do you approach a mutual close plan? What do you think about?
That's a really good question, because I think when we look at a mutual close plan, or whatever terminology we use, mind you, that's actually really important too, because to your point, you don't want to go to a customer and say, "Here's a mutual close plan." The terminology that we use,
close, isn't it?
yeah, exactly. Even the terminology alone, it's actually quite powerful if you actually spitball the idea with your sponsor. And so we've used terminology, everything from mutual close plan, joint execution plan, mutual success plan. All of these things are great, and when you agree on it, that becomes a working document with you and your customer. And the moment that you actually have that working document together, it's powerful, because you can almost share the ideas, the timelines, and you can even build out Gantt charts. So I think none of my mutual close plans have been identical. They've all been very different, and the approach has always been collaborative. And I think that's really important with this, where I know in certain sales methodology, you kind of build it out with your team and you go, "Here you go, and please agree to this." It doesn't fly. And the more senior the people, the more they'll come to you and say, "Who's this muppet?" But the approach, though, is also really important, because to your point before about, I guess, this kind of methodology, there's no right or 100% right methodology with these things. So if you take Sandler, you take the Challenger method, the way that I've approached everything in my sales cycle, I take little bits of this and that and turn that into my own little kind of approach, because you almost have to make a call how you do this approach based on the people that you're selling to, their buying cycle, or even how they operate internally. So if you're dealing with, say, one bank or someone in supply chain, they've got different formalities and different approaches and different ways that they communicate internally. So the last thing that you want is you challenge their notion, like say with a challenger sale, when someone doesn't like to be challenged. And then in certain aspects, like say you're dealing with a bank who loves to be challenged because they love ideas, then you kind of have to gauge that and understand what their MOs are, in order to kind of mold your approach to their way of thinking. And I think it's really important. And the only way to do that is comes back to trust again. So if you don't have that trust and you don't understand who you're dealing with, then a lot of those little idiosyncrasies and intricacies you can't actually execute on.
Since I joined Salesforce 12 years ago now, 13 years ago now, that core value in a sales process of starting with trust, it's I think it's one of the most important features of a good sales career. And if organizations build that as their fundamental value, then, hey, customer, we don't trust you, don't do business. Hey, customer, these are really important pieces of what we want to do. How do we establish trust first? And then all these things so easily flow from what you're going to do. Hey, internal stakeholder that I'm working with inside my own business, we haven't got trust. You know that's going to blow up. I mean, Simon, you've worked in so many different organizations, but, you've also had a huge part of your career in SAP, being a German organization.
Yep.
And I mean, they probably take a little bit of a flavor towards trust. Is that something that happens?
No, look, I don't see it as fundamentally different, to be honest with you. I think, look, I spent many years there.
I said it's flavor, not different. Yeah.
Different flavor, I guess. Yeah, look, it's culturally organizations are different. American companies are different to European companies in general, the way they run themselves, the way they motivate themselves, etc. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're a big German software company or a big American software company, you need to get on the same page as your prospect. And if you don't do that, you're not going to be successful. And I think American companies will tackle it from a slightly different angle than European ones. But I think, over the 30 odd years I've been doing it, they're becoming more similar. I think internally cultures are quite different. But I think we've learned enough over the last sort of 30 years of technology change, what do customers need, what journeys are they going on. When I started my career, it was about, it certainly wasn't digital transformation. It was about integrated business processes and having a finance system that wasn't sitting on a mainframe, and 3-tier client server architecture was, something that was exciting and new. And, we've morphed that into, all the way through to cloud. And, some organizations are now saying, yeah, cloud is great for some of my applications, but other applications I need to have more control and ownership over where it sits. And, I want it on premise, which, I didn't anticipate that trend coming. But fundamentally, what is it that your customer is trying to achieve? And how do I engineer my path and my relationship with my customer such that I'm serving their mission and goals in a way that is going to make them successful? And by definition, my methodology needs to align with that. So, they are all different. I've worked for a few, but honestly, they're converging very much. And I think what's interesting is if you go from one company to the next, and I've recently started a new role, most of the language and most of the ways we do things, they're subtly different, but they're very, very similar. A classic, right? Forecasting. I've done forecasting in many different organizations, and I talk about best case. That's fundamentally something that salespeople get. It doesn't matter whether I'm at Veeam or SAP or Salesforce or anything in between. It means very, very similar things. But I think in all of those organizations, you have salespeople that follow a methodology, and it becomes painful for the poor customer to walk through and hear some of the terminology that's thrown at them. And I think as you get more mature and more experienced, you follow the method, but you nuance the message, is probably the best way of describing it.
One of the things that I've experienced in the last couple of months doing some work with a number of different organizations, I've been doing some sort of private consulting, is the piece that it's really missing in a lot of sales processes is a good understanding of discovery. And I'm really surprised by it. Organizations jumping into this, and of lots of different sizes, selling from enterprise all the way through to SMB. I've got you in a meeting. We got here because you have you're in the space that I'm in. Quickly, let me tell you about my product. And it's this willingness to understand. Stop, don't. Just start that process of understanding where they're at. And be transparent about it, and be really comfortable saying, listen, I can sit here and waste your time on a 30-minute pitch and hope the mud sticks to the wall. That's an absolute waste of your time and mine.
Yep.
And the best way we go about this is I understand about where you're at, what you're trying to achieve in your business, what you've been tasked, what your KPIs are this year, and what they're going to look like next year, because it's always more than a 1-year cycle. And then I can work out if I can help you. And if that's not the conversation you want to have, hey, talk about the football. No problems, right?
Don't talk about
I mean,
the
Guy,
weather.
like again, I'd go back to some of the things I've seen you do really well. Like you're a bit of a master of discovery, and it's part of that relationship piece. How do when you walk in, you've got this this net new opportunity. How do you approach the discovery conversation to really open up, like get the onion to sort of unpeel and peel back the layers? How do you approach discovery?
Oh, mate, that is a great question. I have to say, the one thing that is really important is you got to get the formalities right. Whoever you're meeting with, you got to understand what they do, their MO, even to the way that they do meetings, and also you got to take even things like the cultural things into consideration. The reason why I'm excited about this question is because some of the things you're saying is reminding me of some of the things that I've absolutely screwed up on, and
Yeah.
I had to learn from these mistakes. So. Here's two really good examples. They're very cultural in respect, and I learned really quick after the fact, and that's how I became quite successful with working with these particular organizations. So one was a German bank. Um, I was working for, I think it was Reuters at that time, so did do quite a bit of traveling. I was literally in the UK working with a German bank. I won't mention which one, but we had no one briefed me about how Germans and let's just say Dutch operate. Now, if we go to a boardroom, we can like have casual conversation, blah blah blah. Over there, there's this whole thing about if you're not early, you're late. So we were there pretty much like 4 or 5 minutes, ready to go. We're sitting in the boardroom, they're all sitting down there, and I made the mistake of just starting the conversation. Like, okay, well, we're all here. Let's start. I just started a conversation, and the person who was facilitating the meeting, being very, very German, highlighted the fact. He goes, "Well, no, it's not 10 o'clock yet. We'll wait until 10 o'clock and we'll start the meeting." And so we literally sat there for 4 minutes in silence until, and it was very, very awkward. But everyone on my side looked at me and went, "He's a rookie. He doesn't understand how the Germans operate." And yeah, so that was a very humbling experience, and I learned really quick exactly what I needed to in order to build that rapport. Because the moment that I screwed up there, I was already on the back foot and I couldn't build that rapport. And it took me a little bit longer in order to build that rapport with that customer. And on the flip side of that, it's with a Chinese bank. And this was over in Shanghai. And of all places, I didn't realize boardrooms over there were all like circular. And so you can almost kind of pinpoint who the decision makers are in other organizations because they've got their titles. But in certain organizations, certain cultures, especially with Chinese companies, um, they have that round table. You don't know who the decision maker is, and sometimes it's not the person who you think it is. And
Mm.
so in a round table, you have to learn really quick the body language and who they kind of turn to. So when you ask a question, say I'm asking Simon a question, I didn't pick up on this until after the fact. So let's just say I asked Simon this question. Simon would look at this one person, and then another person would answer, and then another person would answer. And so as soon as you pick up on who actually answers that question, that person is the decision maker, or that person is the influencer. And you have to learn really quick in order how to I guess, work with that kind of cultural aspect too. And again, it's a learning experience. No one briefed me on it, and there's nothing really out there where you can actually learn some of these kind of
Yeah.
business cultural acumen because it evolves over time as well. So, I mean, those are kind of extreme examples, but I guess that the point to those two stories is you really have to kind of learn along the way, and it comes with experience in order for you to kind of build that trust immediately. And some of those little idiosyncrasies, if you screw up,
They're important.
learn from it, and it makes for it makes for a nice story, especially in a podcast like this.
Mate, I had a similar one years ago where I worked with Nikon cameras, and I didn't understand that when the Japanese leadership came over, the leader wouldn't sit at the board. I'd say if there was a big tape meeting, the most important person didn't. And I don't know if this is a particularly Japanese thing or it was just the way this guy operated. He wouldn't sit at the boardroom table. His team would, and he would sit behind, and it was only on certain items that they would defer. And I was like, why is like I just couldn't understand what was going on.
Mm.
And then I worked out kind of 2 or 3 meetings in, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's the most important guy in this room. He's too important that sitting at this table is beneath him. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like
Very
now
different.
again, I have no contact. I haven't done an enormous amount of work with Japanese people. I don't know if that's standard, but it was like just this was a hot. No, we had tea ceremonies and everything. It was amazing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it was he wasn't sitting at the table. He wasn't part of the conversation.
Yeah, I remember, I was in Germany living there for a couple of years in the early 2000s. And I was working in a mostly Canadian team sitting in Germany. And my job at the time was teaching salespeople how to do value selling. And we ran these workshops, etc. And as a result, we had people flying in from all over Europe. And, we had the Dutch, the Germans, the French, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the nuances between each of them was pretty fundamental to getting the best out of them. Now, I'm internally teaching this, so I'm talking to enterprise AEs from France, from Germany, from all over Europe, and they're all subtly different the way they do things. And I screwed up very similar to you, Guy. Didn't understand the nuances there, and somebody gave me a book which I've never forgotten. It was called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands, and I don't know whether it's still in print, but oh my goodness, it went through every country in the world, how business culture worked, the nuances of how you deal with different backgrounds of people, etc. I loved it. It was a really fascinating book, and it was partially due to the content because it was incredibly well researched. But what it brought to me was a similar lesson you got, Guy. Was everybody's different. Companies have different cultures as well as nationalities. So I think in Australia, you think about big retail. Is Woolworths culture the same as Coles culture? Not necessarily. Is National Australia Bank the same as Commonwealth Bank? And I think there's probably an interesting piece of work there. Someone to do the corporate equivalent of kiss, bow, shake hands. How to insurance companies act versus how to banks act versus how to retailers. It's but a good sales guy picks up on those cues and learns from them. And the theme of our podcast, Dan, you learn a hell of a lot from your mistakes. You don't learn as much from your successes.
100%. Yeah, I mean, even just I recall just a minor one of business cards in doing Japanese, two hands, you hand the business card across and you accept the other one, and where's the cultural piece of that come from? That's about offering gifts to each other.
Yep.
You're trading at the start of the conversation. It's a really important cultural piece. And if you walk up and stick your hand out, it's just not what they expect. And it's not and it's not seen as disrespectful. It's just, you're not one of us. You don't understand us. So now, back to the question about discovery, I'm not going to open up. I'm not going to tell you what it is because you're not one of us yet.
Yep.
So, mate, we started this conversation. We were talking about the concept of the ever running season, right? And I think there's another lesson out of our sports colleagues to learn. And I've always described this as, you want to see reps who have got themselves out of the comfort zone. They've actually pushed beyond what is easy to do. And part of that, and I know this has happened multiple times in my career, is being made redundant. And that can happen for a multitude of reasons, right? And it was one of the things that I want to kind of put out there. And I know Simon and I in recruiting people have talked about the fact that we actually like recruiting people who've been made redundant. Like they've tried hard enough where they've tripped on their shoelaces and picked themselves up and gone again. That's a big part of sales. But it can happen because you've got the wrong territory. It can happen because you stepped into an enterprise role from mid-market before you were ready for it. Okay, great. You tried and you failed. Awesome. You've learned. What are you not going to do again? It can happen because, hey, coming out of a pandemic, free money meant that the market, the interest rates have gone up, and all of a sudden, everyone globally is trying to work out how do they become profitable. Like all of these things can change why organizations last week had 1,000 salespeople, now they've got 500, and you're on the wrong side of the list, right? So that's the first thing I want to, as we kind of step into this conversation, put out there for salespeople. It's not about you. But Guy, I think everyone on this call has been made redundant at some point in time.
Yep.
Even recently. How do you, I mean, I know you've had a pretty, tumultuous experience in the last couple of years, having had that experience a couple of times, which is pretty awful. How do you, you have that conversation, how do you deal with it next? How do you deal with it personally, but then what do you do with it in your career?
Wow, that's I'll have to say that's a very meta question if I'm thinking about the actual circumstances here, because I think the best way to address this is you got to prioritize yourself first. I mean, your mental health is probably the most important thing that you really need to prioritize. I know that's a little bit of a given, but it's very, very important in the way that you address things, because the nuances in the way that your body language kind of emanates across the people that you speak to across that period of time, it really does have an impact. So, I mean, I got made redundant twice in the span of 6 months, and I didn't realize it had an impact on my own mental health, because I thought, great, you know what? I'm going to take a step back, take some time off, enjoy my life for a few months, learn. And mind you, I did enjoy that time, because I did a lot of cooking at home, put on a couple of extra kilos, and I did a little bit of soul searching. But on the flip side of that, I had a lot of challenges, because it was basically during this whole economic downturn with tech, where everyone was basically losing their jobs. So I think 25% of the marketplace, I don't know, I'm making up numbers here, but I'll put it this way: every job that I was applying for, there was anywhere between 200 to 400 people applying for the same job. And I didn't learn that fact until maybe a month or so after I've applied for so many roles. And the more roles I applied for, the more it really impacted not just my mental health, but my ego, because I thought, my God, I feel very worthless in the marketplace. Um, these jobs that people were knocking on my door saying, we need you, and I'm turning down, now I couldn't even get past the screening phase. And it made me realize that I should have taken my own advice on the way that I actually approach customers, because we'll put it this way. Uh, think about the technology adoption kind of curve, where you've got the innovators, you've got the early adopters, and I guess all the way back to laggards. Now, we want to invest our time with people in organizations that we sell to, who are the innovators, the early adopters, because they're the ones who kind of go on the journey with you. They understand the story. They understand exactly where I guess, the innovation and the trajectory is going to be for the company that you want to kind of invest in. But in your own personal development, you need to be in that space too. And what I found was, when I was applying for all of these jobs, I wasn't anywhere near that innovator space. I was applying for jobs, I was the laggard. And
Yeah.
I didn't have that realization until I've received so many rejections. And I thought, oh my God, what do I need to do here? So this is where I think the critical juncture is that helped me with what I was trying to do. Um, I took a step back. I looked at the industry, and I looked at, where does everything need to be? Where do I want to be in which organization? And so I started targeting companies where I thought, this is where the next big thing is going to be. And so um, I guess if I can add a little bit of a talk track to this, if we look at tech in the cloud space, application space, a lot of organizations invested a lot of money during the pandemic. And dare I say, there's a little bit of overinvestment in that space. And because people overinvest, that means they're not going to be spending much on the application space. They want to be able to kind of come out of the pandemic, spend more money on optimization. And optimization is really important, because this is kind of where the next 5 to 10 years is going to be. It's not application space, it's down one below, it's in the data layer. And the data layer is really important, because you've got organizations out there who are trying to ingest right through to processing and even getting outputs. Everything from Gen AI, I know that's a bit of a buzzword, everyone wants to jump on that, but the consumption of data in order to get the best outcomes for their customers or their customers' customers is growing exponentially. We're not talking about terabytes, we're talking about multiple petabytes. And I was looking at the companies that were basically in that data space. Who are the market leaders, and what are the kind of risks in organizations in if they are going to go through this journey of developing their data strategy? And I thought, hang on, security is a thing. Backup and recovery, which is where I'm in, is another big space. And also the transformation of that data, surfacing it across the applications, is where a lot of organizations are putting their focus in. And so this is where I started targeting customers, because then I flipped my own narrative around. I wanted to be the early adopter, or I also wanted to be the innovator, saying, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to be telling my story to the customers and actually be that market leader. And that's kind of where everything kind of shifted, and where it really helped me out. And it just so happened that I found an amazing company now to work with. And I guess the thing that really helped me out there was the fact that my mindset changed, but also the mental health also changed. I had a lot more motivation, a lot more ability to kind of get up in the morning and say, hey, this is exactly what I want to do. I knew exactly the things that I had to do on a day-to-day basis in order to get my to achieve success. Go back 2 or 3 months ago when I was in that laggard stage, I'm like going, oh man, emails, rejection, rejection, rejection. What am I doing wrong? And so it's a small little shift in that mindset. But the other thing that also helped me shift is you have people around you who are in a similar position, who you can kind of almost spitball ideas or almost have a therapy kind of a session about where you are in your redundancy journey,
Yep.
if I can call it that. And I think that's probably the best thing that ever happened to me was actually have people around me. So Simon, you've been one of those people that's helped me. And yeah, if it wasn't for that, I probably would be still stuck in this same closed loop of kind of feeling sorry for myself, going, my worth in the marketplace is not that good. So yeah, just wanted to thank you for that. But also, it's helped me out a lot with my journey.
It's an interesting journey, mate, because we've all been through it. Um, I take out of that, there's one thing I learned. I mean, I was made redundant a bit over a year ago, and I very, very similar journey to you. You know, depth of depression, da 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 da. And I was ashamed, to be honest with you. That was one of the emotions I was feeling because every job I'd had in my career, I was poached from the last one, and suddenly I found myself, I didn't have a path to the next. You know, mortgage payments are still being asked. Interest rates are going up. You know, my daughter's school fees, yada yada yada. And I went and actually saw someone. I went and saw a psychologist and talked to him about, you know, how I was feeling, etc. And it wasn't so much going to the psychologist. What I realized, it was about actually being honest and talking to those around you that you trust about what you're actually experiencing. I feel worthless. I don't know what to do. I'm struggling. And honestly, getting those words out of my mouth changed the entire narrative in my brain. And then I became positive. And then I just suddenly went, well, A, I'm not useless. B, I've done this for a while. I'm probably okay. And to your point, Guy, what do I really want to go do? I don't want to just go work in what I've just done. This is an opportunity to pivot and do something a little bit different. And I think for me personally, the most important thing was having an honest conversation about how I felt with the people around me that I trusted. And I think, you know, one of the failings of, you know, being a bloke is a chronic inability to be honest with those around you about how you're actually feeling. And that, my goodness, if there's one piece of advice I can give, be really honest about how you're feeling to those around you that you work with. And it's amazing them leaning in. Not everybody gives you perfect advice, but verbalizing the way you're feeling changes everything. It was just an incredible journey for me.
Oh, mate, I absolutely second that. I did not realize I was not okay until we had these conversations because I spent all that time thinking, yeah, I'm perfectly fine. And I didn't even realize the small little things that were, I mean, if you look at a scale of 0 to 10 as to where your mental state is, a 10 is kind of when you're really bad. I was usually kind of hovering between a 0 and a 1. Small little things like, say, maybe I dropped a glass breaks. I'm like, that's fine. But I was starting to get a little bit short, and it was impacting the people around me, especially my family. And I was oblivious to it. And it was
Yep.
only until I verbalized it, and we had this conversation, right? The moment you verbalize it and you realize, hang on, I'm actually not okay. And you start working around the conversations with the people around you. That's when you think, okay, now this is the therapy. This is the thing that I need because it became real. It became something that I could address.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. Mate, you know, the other thing that just the way you've just described that experience we've all been through, right? And I know so many people who'd be listening sort of have been through this or will go through it at some point in the future. Job ads are an RFP. And like as a salesperson, when you see an RFP, you go, oh, really? Oh, no, it's the worst engagement. It's the worst way to try and find a customer. So you don't do it. Like you don't chase RFPs.
Mm-hmm.
Yet when you're applying to a job ad, it's an RFP. Why? So if that's the only way, and like what the win rate of RFPs is like single digits if you're lucky, right?
Yep.
What are we applying to RFPs for? what do? You go out, you build relationships with people, you do some discovery, you work out whether I've got a product that you can fit, you sell them a product. Just you're the product, right?
Yep.
And like just what you said there, like it's just actually doing the whole piece. Because I've always said if you can't sell yourself as a salesperson, like don't hire them. If a person can't walk in and run you through a sales cycle about themselves, don't hire them. They can't sell your stuff.
Mm.
But do the whole thing, like treat the whole thing like a sales cycle.
Yep.
Build your territory. Work out what your target customers are. Work out what product you want to, what you're going to go and sell it. Mate, you've really given me a light bulb moment there in terms of how to look at that whole process of what your next career step should look like.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm blown away. You've waited till right at the end to give me a zinger. It's awesome.
Oh, thanks, mate. Actually, I want to leave you guys with one thing because this phrase or this quote that my father gave me, it never really resonated until now. And he kind of paraphrased it from Churchill, but it was a Churchill quote. And if you think about success, it's not about to Simon's point. It's not about I guess learning from your successes, learning from your mistakes. But my father used to say to me that success is basically the capacity to survive failure. And when you survive failure, you understand all of those things. That's the way you build resilience. But then you become a better person, and that's what leads to success.
Yep.
Mate, we normally end each podcast asking for a great piece of advice, and I didn't even have to ask the question, and you gave it. So, mate, look, we're at the top of the hour. We're gonna wrap it up there. Guy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been a fantastic conversation. We've walked through your life in a whole bunch of different areas. We've looked at the concept of the ongoing season, what it's like to be made redundant, discovery processes, mate. We've really covered the whole gamut of the sales process. So, mate, thank you so much for coming on. For all of our listeners, if you're watching on YouTube, please click that subscribe button, go down below, click like, give us a comment if you can. If you're listening on Spotify or on Apple, find the plus sign so we can make sure we let you know when the next episode comes out. Drop us a comment, give us a rating. We really appreciate that. But for everyone, thank you so much for joining this episode of Growth Pulse, the B2B Sales Podcast. We'll be back soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.